Well, hello, Sarah.
Hi, Jane. Very nice to see you.
Great to
Um,
see you too.
I think I'll start off by just saying that we're really grateful that you agreed to join us to talk about the 250th anniversary of Abigail Adams writing the famous letter that we sort of collectively think of as Remember the Ladies to her husband, John, while he was in Philadelphia 250 years ago today. And I think we thought it would be fun for audiences to learn a little bit more about that letter, why it's important, why we should celebrate it, remember it, but also because a little inside story from us making the film. I don't know if you remember this, but on our first meeting around the script, you suggested that we might want to add a little more Abigail Adams to the movie in general, and particularly around this correspondence. And so I thought it would be fun for viewers and people to learn a little bit about not just the letter, but the process of making sure it got into the movie.
Absolutely. And it's an incredible piece of writing. We have the benefit of history of a time of pain for Abigail and John Adams because they were far apart. And she had just lived through the ending of the Siege of Boston and the British evacuation from her city, which was perpetually terrifying, right? She starts this letter on March 31st of 1776. The British evacuated on March 17th. So while we remember it as the Remember the Ladies letter, it's a three-page letter, and it starts with talk about the military goings on in Boston, the gradual resumption of the city to normalcy. I'm fascinated. I was reading it again this morning in anticipation of this conversation with you, Sarah, and she sort of sidles into it, right? It's two-thirds of the way down the second page of a letter. She writes the first two-thirds on March 31st and then adds to it again on April 5th. So she's sort of keeping it journal style over quite a number of days. And she starts with that, and by the way, right? I've given you all these musings on what's going on the home front. I long to hear that you have declared an independency. She knows that her husband has been the great champion of independency, dash, dash. And by the way, a sense almost that she's slipping in something that she knows will be momentous. By the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire that you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. Um, this is often taken, it sounds so modern,
Mhm.
and it's often taken as a kind of contemporary expression of women's rights thought, right? Like that you go from Abigail Adams to Sojourner Truth and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and then voila, you've got the 19th Amendment. She's actually not talking about voting rights at all, but she is speaking as a female patriot. She knows that women have been important in the war. We know from the musical 1776 and the correspondence, the ongoing discussion between women in Boston and congressmen, including John Adams, about war materiel, right? Providing saltpeter for gunpowder in exchange for the pins they need to run their household. So she's writing as a patriot, but she's not writing as a citizen. She's a petitioner. I desire, please, will you remember the ladies? It's the language of petition that we see from all of the disfranchised in court. And what she's asking for is for the laws to give women some protection over their own persons. So the wonderful quote that we have in the Florentine film's American Revolution stops just short of where she makes her actual case for what she's asking for. Can I go ahead and read that?
Please, I would love
Uh,
that.
remember the ladies, blah, blah. If particular care is not paid, we're determined to foment a rebellion. We hear the language of the imperial struggle
Mhm.
entering. And then she goes on to say that your sex are naturally tyrannical. Another revolutionary keyword is a truth so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute. Um, why then? not put it out of the power of the vicious and lawless, to use us with cruelty and dignity, with impunity. Men of sense in all ages abhor those customs which treat us only as the vassals of your sex. Regard us then as beings placed by Providence under your protection. So to treat us with impunity, women have no sexual autonomy. Married women have no sexual autonomy. They have no right to their own earnings, and in only in rare cases to their own inheritance, property that may have come to them through their fathers, to the disposition of where they live and how they live. She's seeking to be a more equal partner in the polity as she already is in her marriage, right? She has the power in her marriage to say this with a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. And that's precisely how her husband takes it in his response.
It's so interesting to think 250 years later how pieces of that letter have um, changed, and the ways in which women have fought for their rights and for their equality, and how both far we have come and how much farther we actually have left to go. And how, Stacy Schiff makes the point in the movie that American history is very grateful for the fact that they were separated and that they have this correspondence that we can look to and help us understand what was happening, both, as you were saying, on the war front. She's reporting to her husband about what's happening in Boston when it comes to the military devastating thing that's happening to Boston at the time, and also tying in these larger political, um, emotional ideas. I've said this a lot in making three big films about war. I think how women uh, move, change, rise to very interesting challenges and occasions when it comes to war is really a great part of the history of humankind. And there's a lot of that is very clear in Abigail's writings, as well as her dear friend Mercy Otis Warren, who we got to know a little bit in making this film. Um, I wonder, what do you think the significance of these smaller, important documents, especially in this year of 2026, how do you think, both in your work at Monticello and around the Declaration, but how do you think we can bring these to the American people and learn from them, get excited about them, celebrate them, commemorate them? What's your view on how to think about that in
So I think
2026?
this is one of the things that the film does really brilliantly is to think about the population of the continent of North America as being founders, right? Not 56 guys in John Trumbull's painting there to sign the Declaration of Independence, which of course never happened in fact, right? The signing straggled in over the course of that summer. And those 56 men who were called on to represent the people of the 13 rebellion colonies knew they were there as representatives, right? Like they knew that Abigail Adams, too, was a founder. Jefferson knew that Robert Hemings at his elbow as he drafted at the house on 7th and High Street, now Market Street, also was a founder, as in they recognized that those people too were born equal with inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and were eager to advance their own claims to freedom and liberty and to braid those claims with the public statements of Congress and other leaders. So that's precisely what Adams is doing here in her letters to her husband, is thinking with the categories that the imperial struggle has foisted on her, right? Tyranny, vassalage,
Mm.
rebellion, rule of laws, right? In your code of law, change the rule of law. And then asking the question that all founders and refounders ask, which is, what does this mean to me? Or how can I use these new tools to make it more true? Abigail and John have both, by the end of March, read Common Sense. They've read these revolutionary utterances that are, as Adams says in his response, really turning the world upside down. And so, it's important to remember that the ways that women grow in wartime are not ways they desire, right? She
Mhm.
didn't say, "Please go
No,
away for a year and give me a lot more responsibilities, put me in, chief." And yet, you can't put the genie back in the bottle
correct.
once she's acted as a household manager, once she's acted as the medical director of the household, right? She's going to go from this struggle into getting her family inoculated during the epidemic of smallpox in Boston later in the spring and summer of 1776. So all of those are skills, and I think they alter the ways that women, young people, enslaved people picture themselves in the chain of being, right? In his response to Abigail, John says, we've been told that our struggle has loosened the bands of government everywhere. And then he goes through this topsy-turvy list. Children and apprentices are disobeying. Schools and colleges are growing turbulent. Indians have slighted their guardians, and Negroes grew insolent to their masters, right? Like
Yeah.
all of the ways that we think of the ladder of society, the rungs are all breaking and jumbling up, and he's right. And he's right because the language of liberty has unleashed this incredibly powerful way of organizing thoughts that people already had.
My next question to you is what his response is to her. And I do think I had not really thought until hearing you talk so beautifully about the way everyone's using the same words and the same kind of rhetoric around tyranny, around rights, around um, pushing the boundaries and how things are bubbling up and changing. And once you put the genie out of the bottle, once the genie comes out of the bottle, you can't put the genie back in. And we see that over and over again in history. But I also think it's very interesting how we try to make this point in the film, how inspirational that these months of 1776 are between Common Sense and the Declaration of Independence, how many pieces of writings there go on in that period of time. And the film is trying to make the point that there are these big ideas and this revolution of how a government might work and to throw off a monarchy. There's also a terribly brutal war, which she is reporting on as well. And everyone's trying to figure out, they don't know how it's going to turn out, which things should come next and how it should work. And it's a very exciting and unusual story in world history that these first 6 to 8 months of 1776 you just can't discount.
Systems are always strained and always cracking and failing, but it's really rare to have a moment in world history where that old ballad, which plays in the film, The World Turned Upside Down, actually seems true.
Right.
And so it's a moment of both peril and possibility, and those things often go together. The old way has failed. We see this in the governing governments of the colonies and then states, right? There's a breakdown in the previous legal order and rule of law. It's a tremendously improvisational
Right.
time, and so she's riffing. Hey, by the way,
Yeah.
beep bop, in your new code of laws, boop a doop. I hope you all remember the ladies. And I'm more I have a sort of kinder gloss on his response, which it's easy to lampoon from the perspective of second and third wave feminism and its aftermath. He writes, as to your extraordinary code of laws, I cannot but laugh. And then goes on to say, everything's upside down. I had no idea that your tribe, another tribe more numerous and powerful than all the rest, were grown discontented. We know better to repeal our masculine systems because you have all the power anyway.
Mm,
I think that cannot but laugh shows the sort of give and take
agreed.
between the two of them.
Yeah.
And even a prolific correspondence like this, which survives almost accidentally through the great care that they have for each other and then that their children have for her voice as part of the record of the nation. They're just the tip of the iceberg, right? We have to remember that we hear from almost nobody, but these are indications that regular folks are having these conversations all the time. And so one of the things I hear in his response is just how much flex there is in the way that they talk about each other. It's not, I will not hear you on matters like this, right? It's, I
Right.
hear you on this all the time. Here you go again. Wink, wink.
It's really great. I mean, I think we can't, the more I learn about their correspondence and the more even you reading the parts of the letter that we leave out, the more your point is really well taken. I think they did have enormous respect for one another and really debated so many of the things that were being talked about in the streets and in coffee houses and are at the heart of the American experiment then and now.
I love the way that we can see a subject turning into a citizen, right?
Yes.
And, she has been the vassal of her father, then of her husband, by the state of Massachusetts law and English common law. She has risen as a patriot, and she's wondering in this and in other letters, what does it mean for me to be a citizen?
Yeah.
That's a question we should all be asking ourselves, even still, 250 years later, every day.
That's the message in the movie, I would say. The takeaway from 12 hours on the American Revolution is how to be a good citizen and what is your responsibility both to your community, small, medium, and large, as we often say. And as Ken says, almost every time he talks about the war and the film and the making of, thank God for Abigail Adams. She's the best writer in the movie.
She's terrific. She's so voicey.
She
And
is.
it comes through even more brilliantly when we have her read by Claire Danes in the film.
I was just remembering that at the second meeting we had, you were very eager to think about who we might have record her voice. And we were so relieved when you liked the way Claire beautifully read Abigail. And I think we're grateful to her for that, even if we had Paul Giamatti reclaim his John Adams for, as he said the last time.
Well, maybe we'll see if we can drag him out of
You
retirement.
might want to have to drag him to Monticello to do something.